Hey, what's up guys and welcome back to the channel. And today, we're getting into some seriously creepy encounters people have had while they were deep in the wild woods. And yeah, these ones are unsettling. I mean, every single story we're diving into today is eerie, tense, and just straight up disturbing. Strange figures between the trees. Footsteps where there shouldn't be any. That feeling of being watched when you know you're completely alone. It's the kind of stuff that makes the woods feel a lot less peaceful. So trust me, you're gonna want to stick around. Quick, thank you to everyone who clicked on the video, it really does mean a lot. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And before we get into tonight's wild woods encounters, let's take a look at today's horror clip.
The CCTV footage looks like it was recorded inside a vet clinic. A woman is lying on a couch, completely relaxed. A dog is in a separate room nearby. Then, out of nowhere, a dark, human-shaped figure runs straight through the wall at full speed. Almost immediately, the dog inside the other room panics and tries to get out, like it sensed or saw something pass by. The woman suddenly jolts up, confused, reacting to the dog's behavior. The figure moves through the wall. The dog reacts from another room. So what do you guys think that was?
I went out one morning to feed the animals and heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the woods. Living out here, you get used to that kind of sound. It's almost always a cougar or some other wildcat making a racket, so I grabbed my shotgun and headed toward the noise just to be safe. The sound wasn't moving at all, just this non-stop screeching from the same spot. When I finally got close enough, I realized it wasn't anything wild or dangerous at all. It was a young goat with his horns tangled in a fence panel. The poor thing was yelling his head off. I slipped his horns out, and he bolted away like nothing had happened. A few seconds later I heard another screech from deeper in the woods and decided my pigs were big enough to take care of themselves. I turned right around and went home. Another time, I was out squirrel hunting way back in the forest. It was a pretty normal day until I heard men talking somewhere nearby. That's not unusual, sound carries weird out there, and it's all public land. But then I heard one of them say, "We'll find him," followed by this whirring noise and occasional beeping. That changed the mood real fast. I slid down into a creek bed and tucked myself under a mess of exposed tree roots, completely out of sight. Stayed there for a good hour, listening, waiting for the voices to get closer or move off. After a long stretch of silence, I decided it was time to go. I didn't take the path, I just cut straight through the roughest part of the woods, sticking to cover the whole way, and headed back to my house without stopping once. Still have no idea what those guys were doing out there, and honestly, I don't really want to. So I was probably the strangest thing someone saw. I was hiking a 14er in Colorado, and at the point I was on the trail, I was long past the tree line. The ecosystem at that point is called alpine tundra. Well, while walking through this highland beauty, I feel a familiar rumble in my tummy. I have to poo, and not a little bit. It's a big boy. I can't hide behind anything in sight, so I'm a little worried, but I keep hiking. Maybe I'll find a boulder or a ridgeline to hide behind. Eventually things become dire. Necessity is, of course, the mother of invention, and in this case, the mother of creativity. I realize if I can find even a small boulder, I can squat down so no one can see me. Eureka! I see a boulder probably 100 meters off the trail to the right. Far enough away that no one will see me. I run to the boulder, and it is smaller than I hoped for, but it'll do. I drop trout and take a dump. Instant relief, but with this relief came a terrible realization. I didn't bring toilet paper. I look around. Grass? Snow? Dear Lord, a smooth stone? My kingdom for something paper. I open my backpack and thankfully find a scheduling permit for a licensing exam that I had taken. It's not important, but I didn't do stellar on the exam and was still bitter. I use the permit to wipe my rear and have another realization. While the boulder I am squatting behind hides me from the part of the trail I had come from, I did not realize in my haste that roughly 20 meters further up the trail, from where I had left it, it takes a hard right. I am squatting, peeing, and wiping my ass with printer paper, completely exposed to hikers coming downhill. Not only that, but as I realize this, there is a young woman hiking down towards my boulder, where I am still crouched like Gollum looming over the precious, no pants, with a badly stained scheduling permit in my hand. She avoided eye contact, but she saw me. I knew it. She knew it. God knew it, and he was shaking his head. I did eventually make it to the top of the mountain, and it was my first 14er. Never going to forget that view. It was one of my first hikes with my girlfriend, so I picked one of the easier routes up the mountain. I wanted her to see the good views without dealing with anything too intense. The trail was pretty straightforward, wide enough to walk side by side, lots of switchbacks, and a couple of spots where you had to step over rocks or roots, nothing crazy. About halfway up, there's this little rock ledge, maybe a meter tall, just something you step onto to keep going. As we got closer, I noticed a guy ahead of us struggling with it. He wasn't old or injured, just kind of stuck. He kept putting his hands on the rock, shifting his weight like he couldn't figure out how to climb a 1-meter step. My girlfriend nudged me and asked if I was going to help him, so I walked over, thinking maybe he twisted an ankle or something. As I got closer, something felt off. He was facing the rock, kind of hunched, and I figured he was catching his breath. Then he turned around, probably thinking it was just me, and immediately the whole situation made sense in the worst possible way. He was holding his phone up with an adult video playing at full volume, and his pants were not where they should have been. He asked if I wanted to watch with him like it was the most normal offer in the world. The second he saw my girlfriend standing behind me, he shot backwards like he'd touched an electric fence and took off down the trail without saying another word. Just a full sprint, phone still in hand. My girlfriend and I just stood there for a second trying to process what we'd walked into. Definitely one of the strangest things I've run into outdoors, weirdness level somewhere around a 9.5 out of 10. The strange part is he didn't disappear after that. He still shows up on the trail all the time. Same spot, same routine, like he's become some kind of bizarre landmark people mention when talking about the route. At this point he's practically part of the scenery. I found a grave once, a fairly fresh one. It looked like it had been filled in not long before I came across it, and the recent heavy rains had caused the soil to sink a bit in the middle. It wasn't out in the open, either. It was tucked under this thicket of bushes that grew together in a way that made a kind of natural arch. If you weren't paying attention, you'd walk right by it. Back then I was in my early 20s, working in an Asian country for a few months. And I'd gotten into a routine of wandering the woods near some foothills to clear my head. I'd head out for an hour or two, just walking without much of a route. It was quiet out there, and I almost never saw anyone else on those paths. That day had been especially intense, long conversations, a lot on my mind, so I'd gone farther than usual. I noticed the grave by accident, really. The ground looked disturbed in one spot off the trail, not in a wild animal dug here kind of way, but in a deliberate, rectangular shape. I walked closer, crouched down, and could see how the earth had been neatly packed and then pulled down by the rain. It wasn't marked. No stones, no offerings, nothing that would identify it as official. Just a mound under the bushes. Then I heard footsteps coming down the nearby path. Just one person, moving at a steady pace. I wasn't used to hearing anyone else out there, so the timing felt strange. I didn't want to be standing over what might be a grave while someone happened to walk by, so I slipped behind a thick tree and waited. They passed without looking around and continued up the trail. Once they were gone, I headed back the way I'd come and eventually made my way home, not really sure what to think. Later I mentioned it to an older friend, someone local who'd lived in that region his whole life. He didn't react the way I expected. No surprise, no talk of animals or old ceremonial burials. He just nodded and said it was most likely a real grave. Then he told me a long story about a feud between two families in a nearby village. According to him, the grave fit right into a string of events involving a man who had attacked several young women, was forced to leave the village because of it, and had recently returned despite all of that. The implication was that the villagers decided to settle things themselves before any trouble started again. Village justice, he called it. Not said with pride or fear, just matter-of-factly. This was all more than 30 years ago now, and I imagine things would play out differently today. Maybe authorities would get involved, maybe not. Hard to say. But at the time, the explanation made enough sense that I didn't question it. I kept hiking those foothills afterward because the woods were still peaceful and familiar. I just made a point to avoid that particular spot. Not out of fear, more out of respect and the understanding that whatever happened there didn't involve me. I stayed on the main paths, enjoyed the quiet, and left that grave alone. I frequent a trail in Southwest Virginia, nothing fancy, just one of those spots you go to because it's quiet and has good scenery. One day I was walking along and noticed a plastic bottle sitting just off the path. That's not unusual, people litter more than they should. But when I picked it up, I realized there was a picture rolled up inside. I thought maybe it was like one of those message in a bottle things, so I pulled it out to look. It definitely wasn't that. The picture was of a naked middle-aged woman, and someone had completely blacked out her face with a Sharpie or something. It wasn't artistic, it wasn't symbolic, it just looked wrong. Weird, but trash is trash, so I tossed the whole thing into the nearest bin and kept walking. I didn't think about it much afterward. A few days later I went back, taking the same loop I always do, and to my surprise there was another bottle in almost the exact same place. Same kind of bottle, same picture, same blacked out face. That's when it went from weird to okay, I'm not touching that again. I just walked around it and kept going. The whole thing gave me a bad feeling I couldn't explain. Since then, I've come across a handful of strange things in that area. It's mostly random junk, piles of stuff that don't look like they belong there. The only thing that really came close to the bottle pictures in terms of unsettling was the time I found a decapitated baby doll. A decapitated baby doll near some old, presumably stolen car radios. The body was lying on the ground, and the head had been pushed onto a branch up in a tree, like someone intentionally staged it. Nothing supernatural or anything, just odd choices by whoever hangs around there. Despite all that, I still like the trail. It's got great views, old train tracks you can walk beside, tunnels, and bridges that are fun to explore. The weird stuff is more like background noise at this point. Every now and then you run into something that makes you shake your head, but the trail itself is still one of my favorite places to go. I'm late to the party, but this will probably be my greatest hiking experience ever. It happened in lovely Switzerland, on a very foggy day in the Alps. I wandered around a large rock on an alpine peak, and came across a herd of goats. The goats eagerly lifted their heads from grazing and watched me. In a split second, I had a near-death experience while I remembered various YouTube videos of rabid goats chasing random people. But hey, I told myself, I simply had to ignore them and walk past them. After all, the alternative was either going 2.5 hours back or abseiling over a cliff that ended around a mile further down. I therefore tried to look completely uninteresting. Apparently that didn't work. On the contrary, the herd of goats reacted a bit like a bunch of teenage girls seeing someone looking a lot like Justin Bieber. In other words, it was intense love at first sight. Including one goat immediately pouncing on my calf and beginning to lick me with immense zeal. I scratched and patted the flock. I'm a polite person, I guess, and they really were very excited to meet me but then decided to move on. A few goodbye scritches, and then it was over. Or so I thought. However, it was not to be that easy. The leader did raise his head, but when I started walking, the whole herd trotted merrily at my heels, bells tinkling in the mist of the alpine peak. Of course, I did the only natural thing one can do in such a situation. I burst into song, and what song is more appropriate than the lonely goat herd from The Sound of Music when you are being chased by an entire herd of goats in the middle of the Swiss Alps? Anyway, the goats warmly embraced my serenading, and it was only after quite a while that they started to fall behind. Every time I stopped to photograph them, they caught up with me. Finally, however, they realized that I don't actually know any of the lyrics to the aforementioned evergreen, and I was finally allowed to continue on my own. It almost felt a little empty. When I came back home, I told the story to a friend. She frowned. Of course it didn't work to sing that song, I agreed, but she continued, no, it's an Austrian goat herd. And you were in Switzerland. That's an undeniable fact. So here's my piece of advice, Swiss goats are very friendly, but do prepare a Swiss song if you want to acquire an entire herd of them. At the top of the ridgeline I scrambled around a plateau of rocks to be on the other side facing another canyon and off the trail to smoke a tiny bowl. This is already a quite secluded trail, maybe expect to see less than 5 people all day. It's like 12 o'clock noon and sunny. Nothing spooky or special. Halfway through my bowl, my dog goes full Razorback, Rottweiler, or Heeler mix and loses her ever-loving mind. Deep dark growl. Gets super skittish and won't go with me back around to the other side. I have to go ahead first and then command her to come past some invisible barrier. I think I even picked her up to get past a section of rock she refused to go past, but I wasn't going the other way around, since I didn't know what the terrain was there or otherwise. I've got goosebumps on every part of my body, and my hair is standing up on my arms the whole time. Now I'm high, and adrenaline got me spooked and paranoid. Based on everything and where we are, I'm thinking mountain lion. I get back on the trail and nope down the mountain. Some 2 weeks previous some transient teen with green hair had been reported missing in town and was thought to have tried hiking with her dog, a wolf or GSD mix, through the mountain range to a popular alpine lake on the leeward side. Her missing person poster was around town and at the campsites down the canyon. Several days after my spook, they found her hanging from a tree just off the trail, and her wolf dog had been eating what he could reach of her legs or torso. I don't know to this day if it was her scent or a wolf dog that spooked my dog, or a mountain lion, as I don't know exactly where they found her body, but it was somewhere close in the same area. But I am so glad I wasn't the one to find her. High, adrenaline pumping, and on edge, a dog, razor-backed and ready for war, coming around a corner to find a long, green-haired corpse half eaten by a dog and hanging from a tree, would have been screwed. This is a kind of long story, but details are important. My boyfriend and I went backpacking in the mountains. I'd been camping before, but only car camping, or I didn't have to carry my bag for long, if at all, so this was my first time actually backpacking. After getting lost trying to find a parking lot the map swore was there, we drove around the mountain and finally found a parking lot at the top. We'd planned to walk up the mountain and camp. And then walk back down the following day, but walking down at first was okay too. About an hour in, it's maybe 6 p.m. and we come across this guy sitting off to the side of the trail cooking on 6:00 p.m., a cheap oil stove. He asks if we know where we're at and if we can point him in the direction of a certain place on the mountain and says he was parked there. He continues talking about how he had a friend drop him off who was going to pick him up at point A and then changed the story to he was parked at point B and then said the friend who dropped him off went to hike somewhere else and another friend who had the map turned back at point C to wait in the car. We finally bid this dude good luck and continue down this trail. The trail is poorly marked and doesn't correspond with the map we found online. We couldn't get an actual map because the park office was closed due to asbestos. So we're really confused when we come to a horse trail with no markings to tell us if we're still on the right path. We decided to go down the trail and see if we can find a place to camp for the night and find our way out in the morning. Both sides of the trail are lined with barbed wire, preventing us from being able to camp there. Eventually, we decide to turn back and go back to the trail before it turns into a horse trail so we can camp there for the night because it was really dark. About 20 feet behind us was the man from earlier. He talked to us again, and through the conversation we learned he had heavy narcotics, including fentanyl and another one I don't remember the name of. So we took off, deciding to go back to the car and just drive home. We live 4 hours away, and we're about 6 miles from the car. So we take off up the trail as far as we can. I got severely dehydrated on the way and was struggling. Finally got to the car and drove home. On the way out of the park, we saw a sign saying hitchhikers may be escaped convicts. A few years ago, 3 friends and I set out way too late in the day to start a 4-day hike on a section of the North Country Trail in Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest. It was already getting dark when we parked my vehicle at the end of the trail, so by the time we drove into the forest 20-some miles away, it was already dark. None of us had been on this section before, so we only knew the general location of the trailhead and the parking area. After an hour of driving isolated national forest roads in the pitch black and not seeing even another vehicle, much less a person, we were more or less lost. Halfway around a horseshoe bend, we saw an RV with some strung-up party lights and a bonfire beside it. We pulled off the opposite side of the narrow road and got out to ask the 3 people by the fire if they knew where the trailhead might be. As soon as we got out, 2 middle-aged women started walking over to us. With the one in front being real friendly and talkative and the other in the back acting very reserved. The first lady comes over to our side of the road and talks with us while the second just sort of stands in the tree line on the opposite side. We told them what we were doing, that we started way too late in the day, and that we needed to find the trailhead to set up camp, and the first lady asked us where we're from. A small town outside of Pittsburgh, we say. Her tone completely changes. She starts sounding like she's both irate and sarcastic, saying stuff like why are you all the way out here? Even though we just told her, and oh, Pittsburgh. They're from Pittsburgh, huh, Pittsburgh, wow. Look, huh? At them, they're from Pittsburgh. Then she sort of quickly trails off and stares at us. None of us knew how to respond. And I could tell my one buddy was thinking about how screwed in the head these people were and how we could get out of there when we heard from the lady in the tree line the unmistakable sound of a pistol being racked. That was our cue to start getting back in the car and saying that the trailhead should probably be up a ways on the left, so we'll try there. The tail lights showed the 2 standing right where we left them until we rounded the bend and drove away faster. We didn't camp where we said we would but found another parking area with a secluded campsite far out of view of the access road. The 4-day hike went well after that first encounter. A couple of years ago, we took our camper out for a birthday camping trip for my oldest son. It wasn't a busy time of year, so the whole park felt practically empty. Besides us, there was the ranger who did occasional drive-bys and maybe 2 other groups camping way deeper in the grounds. It was one of those nights where everything is so quiet you can hear the smallest thing. By the time it got late, the kids were all asleep inside the camper. Dinner stuff was washed and put away, and the area was cleaned up. The only ones still awake were my husband and me. He was just sitting nearby enjoying the fire, and I was settled in with a book, listening to the small crackling sounds and everything else being dead silent. At one point, I heard movement in the shrubs next to me, a quick rustling sound. I assumed it was my husband getting up or shifting around, so I looked up, and he was still right beside me, completely still. So I shrugged it off, figured it was just wind or maybe a small animal, and went back to reading. A minute or two later, I heard it again, except this time it was on the gravel. The sound was different, more like actual footsteps. It was off to the side, just far enough past the glow of the campfire that I couldn't see what it was. I didn't move, just kept my eyes on my book and pretended to read. While thinking, okay, if this is some random lunatic walking around out here, I'd rather not alert them that I hear them. Then everything went quiet for a little while, which somehow made it worse. But after a few seconds I heard scratching. Not loud, just enough to snap my attention toward the camper. That's when I saw a silhouette about the size of a 10-year-old kid standing on top of something. My heart dropped because the first thing my brain did was assume it was a person. I grabbed my phone and clicked the flashlight on, and the light hit a desert fox perched on the little children's plastic table we'd packed for eating. It must have been attracted by the smells from dinner, even though we'd already cleaned up. It froze for a second, stared straight at me with this "oh, hey" expression, then just hopped down casually and wandered off like it had other places to be. My adrenaline took a while to settle after that. But at least it was just a cute little thief and not the murderous scenario my imagination jumped to. Never told anyone this. I was 12 to 13 years old and camping with my cousins in the Adirondacks in New York. We were at the campsite alone. It was in the middle of the mountains near a peak. Everyone else is asleep after a night of drinking and smoking, and I was awake listening to music and enjoying a bowl before going to the tent. Halfway through my song, my phone stopped working and the music stopped. This was an old iPhone 4, so it wasn't that good, but it's never done this before. I said, "Damn it," and quickly finished the bowl. Then, as I'm about to get up, I see 15 to 20 lights just appear in the sky. The thing about the Adirondacks is that there's very little light pollution, so at first I thought they were stars, but then they began moving. There were stars everywhere, and these lights moved all around the sky in patterns that no tech we have today could do. They would pause in midair and then continue or just do a 180 in a second without any turning or maneuvering. I wasn't freaked out, more so just astonished at what these were. My phone still wasn't working, and the camera wouldn't have been good enough to take a video of it anyway. This went on for what felt like 10 to 15 minutes. I have no actual idea because I didn't have a source of time, and then they disappeared just as fast as they came. They didn't shoot up or anything, they simply just vanished. I still don't know how to explain it, but I honestly believe I was seeing extraterrestrial spacecraft that night. I was out in the middle of nowhere camping with my dog. We do this whenever we can. Not a park or campground. Just walk through the woods along trails, pipelines, and old access roads. Find a nice place to settle down and set up camp. I spend my time building a fire ring, obtaining wood from fallen trees, and setting up a tent for us, while he runs around telling porcupines he wants to be their new best friend and chasing off deer like they're there to steal his supper. This past summer, night falls and we retire to the confines of the tent. I read a bit. He turns in circles until he remembers he won't actually ever get comfortable out here, so then he settles in against my legs. When you sleep outside, you don't sleep straight through. I don't, anyway. I awaken every 30 minutes or so. It doesn't bother me. It's part of our reptile brain. Something says, this isn't as protected as it needs to be. No big deal. It's part of the experience. Why sleep through it all, anyway, when you can have these periodic moments of presence? I'd rather be here than anywhere, and I'm here right now. Still. It's nice. It's 3 a.m., and I'm dozing when suddenly I awaken. Something is wrong. I can sense it with every part of my being. My first instinct is to protect the dog. There must be an animal outside, and a canine's nature is to defend. He'll hurt himself to protect me, and I have to stop that from happening. But then I realize this is not an animal threat. This is more sinister. My eyes have remained closed through all of this, because these thoughts occur in mere seconds. I open my eyes, knowing that if there were an animal close, he'd have been up and moving before me. That's how nature works. So, no, there is a bigger problem. Someone must be out there, and his intent will not be benevolent. In that moment, I try to move but can't. I'm paralyzed. How? By what? I feel it roll through me like a wave of electricity, down my legs, up my chest, sparks flowing across my arms. Then I realize what is happening. I'm not breathing. I don't actually mentally make the connection. Instead my body constricts, and I find myself suddenly gulping air. You don't think about breathing. Unless you're actually thinking about it. Like now. But, no, you don't think about breathing, so you don't think about not breathing. I've always been a little jealous of those that die in their sleep. I think I still am. But this notion that it was peaceful, well, I now know it's not. It may happen quickly, but that exit is no less terrifying than any other. My family and I were camping in the Allegheny Forest in Pennsylvania. My brothers, my then friend, and I decided to go for a trek down a path not too far from the site. We set out at about 4 p.m. in July. Well, we're talking and shooting as every teenager does when left together. I guess at some point time passed us pretty quickly because it was getting dark. It felt like we blinked and 4 hours passed. We realized we didn't know what direction camp was, and there was no cell service. My youngest brother, 13 at the time, started freaking out. He didn't like the woods and certainly didn't like them in the dark. And that's when the noise started. It started out really quiet. As if it was from a distance. This low, rhythmic beating of something. We stopped between some trees, well off the path by now, and waited in silence, trying to piece together that sound. It was getting closer and louder, more frantic sounding, and any and all rhythm was abandoned with haste. If you've never been in the forest at night, and if you don't have any experience with the forest in general, it's easy for sound to ricochet off the landscape. It muddles your senses and can easily become disorienting. This war drum from hell was getting faster and louder and sounded like it surrounded us on all sides. Before any of us had the sense to move away from the area, a good couple dozen or more deer frantically burst through our circlet of trees. Not just running as deer do, but actively running from something. This wasn't a herd looking for food, this was prey in a desperate attempt at self-preservation. They fled in the direction I was certain was north. We breathed a sigh of relief too soon as a buck came up from behind the herd, breaking the clearing and making an attempt to lunge at my brothers. The older of the two, merely 16, grabs the youngest and dives to the left, the buck parries to the right. Spinning frantically and lunging its head in my direction, missing my chest by inches. Its hind legs buck, sending hoofs into the air at my friend's head before bleating out a frantic series of sounds friends and running in the direction of the herd it came with. We stood around for a while, listening to them fade away and cracking jokes at how strange the situation was. None of us had ever been that up close to a live wild deer before. We turned and began heading in the direction we best thought was south, back to our camp before the night swallowed us whole. The sound of the herd fading rapidly behind us. The woods had a strange stillness to them on our walk back. The silence was deafening. No crickets. No bats. No bugs in the air. I assumed a storm was coming, and we quickened our pace, dreading the scolding our parents would give once we finally returned to camp. I think the silence is what made the next sound so creepy. It cracked through the air sharply. Like the first bolt of lightning before an impending rain. A harsh, high-pitched whistle. 2 tones. A long high note followed by a slow low note. Then silence. A few steps. The whistle again. But we didn't hear any footsteps. Not even steps overshadowing ours. We paused and listened. Nothing. We walked, the whistle came. But every time it sounded off, it was in a different location. Behind us. Above us. In front of us. To the left. To the right. And only when we were walking. I thought for sure our parents were playing a trick on us. We called out, mocking them for being dumb and thinking we'd get scared. No answer from the forest. Called again, still no answer. Walked forward and was met with the whistle. The same tune every time. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. The forest was getting darker and darker with every step. It was 9 p.m., and we still didn't know where camp was. We thought we found the path and hightailed it in the direction of a clearing we thought seemed familiar when, from dead center of our group, that hideous whistle sounded. I swear to God all 4 of us jumped out of our skin and ran. We broke through the clearing and saw the orange glow of a campfire. A couple yards out. We hauled faster than ever before. We were met breathless by my mom, who seemed concerned. We told her what happened, and she thought it was a joke. The adults all seemed to shrug it off. Except my grandpa. He didn't say anything, just had this look about him. He seemed off. Our night continued without interference. At 3 a.m. we got into our respective tents and drifted to sleep with the sound of the dying fire not far away. Sometime before sunup he awoke to the sound of tapping on the edge of my tent. I peeked out to find my brothers visibly shaken. "Dude. Did you hear that?" I went to respond when the whistle cut through the night. It was at a distance, but it was there. I grabbed Jake and my brothers. We grabbed our lights and looked around. The whistling sound seemed closer, but we couldn't find anyone. The adults were drunk and passed out. We doused the fire's embers and holed up in my tent. I don't remember falling asleep. In fact, I didn't wake up until almost 11 a.m. When I did, the adults were arguing about who trashed the camp. Apparently when they woke up the beer cooler was dumped out and the cans crushed. The food cooler was okay but dragged beside the fire ring. My brother's tent was collapsed but not torn. Charred wood was strewn about. Small things are just left as a mess. They concluded a bear must have wandered in and gotten curious. Played with the tent and coolers, then left on his merry way. I'm not so sure. The rest of the camping trip went off fine. But every once in a while we heard the whistle from a distance. I don't know if someone was messing around with us. None of the adults will fess up. I just know it scared the hell out of me, and every time we camp in that forest, I sleep in my vehicle and not a tent. I worked in the wilderness for a good chunk of my life, and I've always been the type to wander off into forests just for the fun of it. Because of that, I've had a handful of creepy or straight up confusing encounters, nothing I can prove, but things that still sit in the back of my mind. One time, a buddy and I were working on a reservation in the Pacific Northwest. We were wrapping up for the evening, light fading fast, when we spotted a shape cutting through the tree line. It was moving upright, kind of quick but steady, and the outline didn't match anything familiar at first glance. I raised my flashlight and caught a pair of glowing eyes staring back at us before it turned and slipped behind the trees like it had never been there to begin with. I tried to rationalize it, told myself it could have been an elk or a moose standing weird behind the brush, and the darkness just made it look wrong. My friend immediately went the opposite direction and said it was either Slender Man or Bigfoot, mostly joking, but he kept glancing at the tree line like he wasn't totally kidding. We never saw it again, but the way it moved stuck with me. Another time, we were on a camping trip in a completely different area, in the middle of nowhere, with no one around for miles except the few of us who went out together. Around 0300, we all got jolted awake by what sounded like an explosion followed by several gunshots, and not from one firearm, at least 2 or 3 different types based on the sound. For a second I honestly thought I dreamed the whole thing, but when we all got up in the morning, a couple guys from the other campsites, people who hadn't even been sleeping near us, mentioned hearing it too. One guy chalked it up to drunk rednecks messing around in the woods, which I guess is always an option. But the gunfire was quick, just a rapid burst, then silence. Another theory floating around was that it might have been something more serious, an execution or some kind of dumping ground situation, because the nearest big city was rough and about 30 miles out. Gang activity wasn't exactly rare there. When the sun came up, we actually tried to track down where the noise came from. We walked a pretty good distance, listening for anything out of place, checking for smoke or debris, but nothing turned up. No tire tracks, no trash, no drag marks, nothing disturbed. Just empty forest, like the whole thing never happened. It still gives me a weird feeling whenever I think back on it. I was a Girl Guide from 10 to 18. I used to go to camp every year, and every year we had a midnight hike. Our guide leader would get us lost every single time as well. The same night of the incident, she walked us into a bog, which I got us out of with the lamest torch I had ever owned. Our leader broke my good torch, I was gutted. Anyway, we were walking along the canal in the pitch black past this house. 2 dogs are out back, barking like crazy. The owner comes out and starts screaming at us and our leader. He's threatening to set his dogs on us for being near his property, which was a public footpath, and just lost it. I grabbed the other girl my age and told her to walk the kids down the path and stayed with our leader in case things got violent. I had been doing karate for a couple of years, so I had the inflated sense of strength. I realize now that I was weak as hell back then, but I knew I could take a hit. He eventually gives up and lets us pass but tells us he's letting his dogs out in a few minutes. We caught up to the rest of the group and got the hell out of there. There are very few guns in the United Kingdom. I was staying at a friend's place as a teenager. He lived on a farm, and we used to walk along the edges of the fields to get to places quicker. One day we were with his little brother and ended up getting chased by a man with a gun. His little brother was so large he couldn't keep up with us. We had to jump the ditch to get away. It's crazy thinking about that. We also found dead birds strung up by their necks on a fence nearby constantly. I was taking my nephews out camping in Mule Canyon, out in the Mojave Desert near Calico. We were in the RV, bouncing along this rough dirt road that cuts across a long stretch of open desert before you reach the canyon mouth. It's one of those drives where you don't expect to see much besides rocks, scrub, and maybe a jackrabbit if you're lucky. A few miles in, I spot a figure ahead, just a woman walking straight down the middle of the road toward us. At first I figured she'd step off to the side once she noticed a full-sized RV coming at her, but as we got closer she didn't even twitch. Just kept her steady, casual pace, staring dead ahead with this wide, too big smile that didn't match the situation at all. About 20 feet out, I slowed all the way to a stop. The kids were still busy messing with snacks and didn't notice anything, but my stomach was already doing flips. She walked right up to the hood and stood there like she was admiring the front grille. Up close, she looked rough, haggard in that way where a person's real age is impossible to guess. Maybe mid-30s, but the desert and whatever lifestyle she had going on made her look decades older. Her skin was leathery and cracked, worse than most long-term desert folks. A couple missing teeth, sores on her jawline and neck, and still that strange smile that didn't move. She stared at the hood like she was watching a magic trick. No eye contact with us, no words, no reaction at all. Just this odd amusement, like the RV itself was telling her a joke only she could hear. After a long minute, she finally drifted around the front corner toward the passenger side. I didn't want to wait for her to make up her mind about anything else, so I eased onto the gas, checking the mirrors to make sure she wasn't in the way. She didn't seem bothered in the slightest, just kept on walking at that same slow, wandering pace, disappearing into the cloud of dust behind us as we pulled away. We never saw her again. That spot was easily 20 empty miles from Barstow, the closest place she could have realistically come from. No car around, no backpack, no sign she was camping. The best I could figure was someone must have picked her up from town and brought her out there for whatever reason. And left her wandering the desert afterward, high as a kite, smiling at nothing, and somehow completely unbothered by being alone out there in the middle of nowhere. Long-time lurker on here, using a throwaway. I've recently found myself snowed in and bored, so I figured I'd finally share my own story. This really happened, and this is how it went down, no nonsense. This isn't fiction. And I'll warn you, it's long. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and I and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning, and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters and traps and practice making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country. But instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course we knew this was dangerous and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers, we discovered bridges no one went to, we fished, and we hid from trains. At night we camped in woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, I and Joe went our own ways. We both left home but always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with family in the day, and at night we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, I and Joe got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer are a hell of a mix. Soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and walk home. The day came, and we started out early in the morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we'd take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, and we had a map, so I gave a what the hell, and off we set. The day went fine. It was fun and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, with trees on every side of the train tracks, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now, this is what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk the area around a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over a hill and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from on top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to be a clear road into it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was quiet, no movement could be seen. No lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all, it was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews. And a built-up section in front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in, we didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness seeing a church in the middle of the woods would elicit. Besides, at this point it was dusk, and we just decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep and move on early in the morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks and shot the stuff, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation about it went a little like this: "Do you hear that? What the hell is that? It sounds like people singing." And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days, it was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from the church. And the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this thing?" The light looked to be candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field's length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the hell out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in movies. But again, it was like he was speaking in a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually it got to where the single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears. Then it stopped. At this point I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder. And hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walking out the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move toward us and the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our stuff, and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it. And we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends all just thought it was kids messing around, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that happened to me out in the woods. Alright. That's gonna wrap up today's stories from the wild woods. And honestly, some of these encounters are the kind that would change the way you look at forests forever. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed tonight's stories. And let me know in the comments, what's the creepiest encounter you've ever had in the woods? Did something follow you? Or were you never really alone to begin with? Until next time. Stay aware, and stay haunted.